Welcome, everyone. My name is Peter Young, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator of this evening's event. This is the 50th Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings event. The events have been over the last 4 years. The events have varied. Some are like this, where it's an interview of some panelists on a particular topic. We've also had leading researchers who presented their the results of their studies on discrimination and what causes, et cetera. And we've also had events where we've gotten people together, leaders in who are involved with this topic, together to try to come up with ideas and then summarize them and implement them and so forth. So it's pretty wide ranging. Uh, we have a volunteer committee. If you want to somehow get involved, just let us know and send us an email, and we'd love to have you help if you're interested and you have the energy to help. With that, I want to say that today's topic is a special one for me for a lot of reasons, but Asian American women in law. And I think the background, of course, is this series is that, uh, you know, in the United States, Asian Americans don't have any trouble getting into good schools and entry level, but somehow in many professions, they get stuck as they hit the middle ranks and above. And there are a lot of reasons for it, and we've had a lot of panels and experts talk about it, but it's a big problem. And I think we all need to find ways to help each other find ways to break through, that those career ceilings. So today we were going to have four panelists, but one is now on a plane, I think going between Korea and Japan. So we're missing Deborah Wong Yang, but we have three here. We have Peggy Kuo, who is a magistrate judge of the United States District Court, Eastern District of New York. We have Alice Young, who is a founder of Alice Young Advisory and a retired partner of a major law firm. And we have Cyndie Chang, who is the managing partner of Duane Morris in Los Angeles. So we have three very distinguished members of the legal community, and we try to get a little variety. So, Pe Pe Peggy, you're the token non-partner of a law firm, so you're going to have to represent your branch of the legal profession well.
Me
Uh,
too.
but this is also special because it's focused on Asian American women. And I do think we all believe, and it is true, that the issue is a problem for Asian Americans generally, but I think there are different nuances about what the issue is with regard to career ceilings for Asian American women. So with that, what I'd like to do, my job is just to moderate in a fireside chat, and we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. Those of you in the audience who want to ask a question, just type in the Q&A chat box, not the general chat box, but the Q&A chat box, and type in your question. And the panelists and I will all be able to see the questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the last 5 to 10 minutes, of this session. So with that, let me let me ask each of the panelists to take 2 minutes and describe what they do and how they got there. I am arbitrarily going to go by alphabetized by last name. So Cyndie, you're first.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Cyndie Chang. So, as Peter was saying, I lead the Los Angeles office of my law firm, Duane Morris. It's a large law firm. I am very proud to have been very involved in advocacy for Asian American women, including serving on as NAPABA. NAPABA is the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, so serving as its past president and really trying to speak about my own personal experience and others' experience about being an Asian American woman in this profession. I know that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about me later. Thank you.
Peggy,
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this group today. I am a United States Magistrate Judge in the Federal District Court in Brooklyn, in the Eastern District of New York. I am not an Article III judge, which are the judges that are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, they have lifetime tenure. I am in a position that was created by Congress that has the authority to do almost everything that the Article 3 district judges can do, except handle felony trials. And then everything else, the civil cases, the civil trials, pre-motion appearances and criminal cases, picking juries, taking guilty pleas, all of those things the magistrate judge can do. So I see a wide variety of cases from employment discrimination to contract cases to patent cases to admiralty and shipping cases, airplane cases, things like that. It was really a wide variety of anything that comes into federal court. And so it's been a wonderful 10 years on the bench so far. And it's been a pleasure to serve in the judicial branch.
Now, Peggy, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Are you sitting at your bench, or is it just a picture of your courthouse?
This is a virtual background, but it is of my in
It's
real
what
life, I would be much lower.
So it actually is it's what people would see if you were in court and they were looking at you?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Alice, you're next.
I'm Alice Young. I had been a partner at various Wall Street firms over the years, been at very Jewish, very WASP, very international, California-based, New York-based. So I've really run the gamut and retired and still extremely active in retirement, but started out very early on. I was in the first class of women at Yale, co-founded ASA, Asian American Student Alliance. At Harvard, I was one of the first Asian American women to attend, and Derek Bell, civil rights activist, and Professor Jerry Cohen were my mentors. I was the first woman and minority to open a branch office for an international law firm. That was back in 1983. And had done a number of firsts, was one of the first lawyers to go into China to do a deal for Revlon in 1979, built a big Asia practice, but also spent a lot of time doing not-for-profit work. So I'm very active in a number of Asian American groups, in a number of women's groups. I have served as a trustee of Aspen Institute and Asia Foundation, and am involved in Committee of 100, Council on Foreign Relations, various AAPI groups, and really am excited to see that there are very many more women and minorities now in law practice, but it's still a big hill to climb.
Yeah, okay. Well,
And I
thank you
want to
very much.
interject here that Alice was one of my heroes in law school.
Oh.
She was really one of the pioneering women in the law.
And I love that so many of the people that I mentored have surpassed me in their amazing work. So thank you, Peggy.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
Thank
right.
you.
Let's start out and get to probably the most important question, which is, what do you perceive as the barriers to advancement for Asian Americans generally, but particularly for Asian American women in the legal profession today? And do those barriers, from your perception from your own career, but also your observing colleagues in different parts of the law, do they vary according to either the industry or the type of entity or the type of legal practice? Because, there's not just one big legal practice. There's the judicial system, there's law firms, there's corporate law firms, there's in-house counsel, so forth. So there are many different segments. So, what's your perception of the barriers to advancement? And do you feel that those are different depending upon what segment and what type of legal profession?
Oh, I'll start. So I would say, broadly speaking, there are two types of barriers. One are the internal barriers, internal to the person, and then the external barriers. And I think some of the internal barriers are the things that you've been taught growing up, maybe through your family or through culture, about what a woman should be and what an Asian woman should be taking care of family, being respectful, those kinds of things, which don't necessarily jibe with advancement in the legal profession. And then there are the external barriers, which are the things that people might perceive about you that may or may not align with those cultural things. And so, some of it is in terms of overt discrimination, or the kind of put downs, or the kinds of people not giving you opportunities because they assume that you can't handle them, those external barriers. But the internal ones are, I think, just as important. And those are things that people might have a little bit more control over. And so I think some of those things might be there. And then I would add, in terms of women, I think one of the barriers or challenges, I would say, that has been identified is taking care of family, and childbearing and those kinds of things. That has evolved over time. And so society has become a lot more accommodating in that way. But those are still things that women in the profession need to think about.
Yeah.
I
And do you
think, though, it's very tough particularly in law firms, because when I was starting out, it was anywhere from 7 to maybe 9 years to partnership. So there was a path that you could see. Nowadays, partnership is maybe 12 years, 14 years. So I think for women particularly, it's an even bigger barrier because those are your childbearing years. And if you decided that you wanted to have a family, the law firms have been trying very hard, but they still have not quite been able to fully accommodate the fact that women and not men give birth. So I think that certainly on Wall Street, it's still a difficulty and a barrier that's higher for women than for men. And I think it's hard for women also in the judicial area. It's maybe a little bit easier these days in corporate, in-house, and whatnot.
Yeah, that's right. Cyndie, any comments?
Yeah, so I can speak, personally and anecdotally. When I had started off trying to be a litigator and thinking that that's thinking that I wanted to be a trial lawyer, I think that I just didn't have the right people in the profession that looked like me, and I could, emulate and see that they had achieved partnership, for example. And so I know that there are the Alices and the Peggys of the world, but they were just so few at that time. And I think that seeing that is in some sense a barrier, because people want to see the trailblazers and see that it's doable. And I know that early in my career, um, I had male partners, just tell me that I wouldn't be a trial lawyer because perhaps of the cultural and stereotypical issues that us as Asian American women face, which is that we're meek, we're modest, we're timid, and so forth. And that's what I was told that I was very early on in my career. Thankfully, I got out of that situation and didn't work for people who didn't really believe in me being a trial lawyer, and left to different law firms until I found a place that I could thrive in, a place that supported me. So anecdotally, that I think I've felt those experiences, and objectively, we can look at data. And I was just looking at the NALP statistics. NALP stands for the National Association of Legal Placement, and they do surveys and data of women in the profession, including minority women in the profession. And the data, demonstrates that we're just not there yet, not at par with what we should represent in the legal industry. So, for example, the most recent data showed that of all law firms, whether they're 100 or less or 1,000 or more of partners in law firms, so despite the size and regardless of jurisdiction, minority women are about 4 to 5%, and that includes minority woman, African American, and Hispanic American, and Asian American. So we share that 4 or 5%. So you can imagine Asian American women only sharing a small percent of that 4%. So where are we? One or two perhaps in the entire country of Asian American women in law firms in any jurisdiction. It's just a very abysmal number.
Yeah,
And that's really in spite of the fact that over 50% of the students in law schools are women. And certainly a decent percentage of that are minority women. And yet, when you look at the ranks of the partnership, clearly something terrible happens along the way. And many male partners blame that on the women and say, hey, they drop out. They decide they want to have families, or that they want to have not-for-profit careers, or they want to be in a smaller firm, or, whatever it is. So it's not our fault. And that's, there's maybe a small percentage for which that's the case. But generally speaking, it's because it's not it's no longer what I would call a hostile work environment, but it is a difficult environment to navigate. And I think a lot of women make the mistake of thinking that they can take off for a while and then come back into law practice in law firms. I think you can certainly come back into law practice. I think you can certainly have very terrific careers coming back. But onboarding, reboarding into law firms is really tough. And so I think it's sometimes a little bit of a misconception or a pie in the sky that you can just hop right back in. The system really, as of speaking now, I think it still doesn't really give that kind of leeway.
I think
and has it changed much? Those dimensions that Cyndie, you and Alice have mentioned, has it changed much over the years, or is it just very slowly, or whatever? Any progress being made on things such as stereotyping women, or accommodating their childbearing years, or whatever?
I would say very slowly. But I've seen progress, and I know all of us on this call, and our goal is to talk more about these issues and broadcast that. As one example, when I was president of NAPABA, and having gone through certain of these issues, I created a program for Asian American women to come early to the convention and have a one-day summit on finding your voice, finding your style, developing certain soft skills to help the Asian American women lawyers. So, I mean, there's a lot of that's going on in terms of how we can really work through these issues, but again, very slowly.
and I would just
Peggy,
follow up.
you were saying something? Go ahead, Peggy.
Yes, I was going to follow up on what Alice said. A lot of women do drop out, but at some point, it is a rational choice to drop out because the environment that they're finding in these large law firms is not very welcoming, and it's not a great place for them to flourish. As a judge, I see women lawyers, Asian American women lawyers, in lots of different positions come before me, and they're not just big law firms. And so I wanted to put a pitch out there for different size law firms and solo practitioners. I've had people come before me who have started their own law firms, and they have clients who are individuals who have very good claims of not being paid proper wages or employment discrimination, things of that nature. And they've been able to carve out a niche for themselves, especially if they're attuned to a particular community, or if they have language skills or some particular background. I've seen Asian American women who are former prosecutors or former public defenders who then go and have their own firms. And so there are alternative paths to success, and trying to fight into these large law firms, that's not the only way. And I know it's been hard, and we have two examples of women who've succeeded there, but I do want to make a pitch for the women watching that there are other ways to be successful, and other ways, even in private practice, to be successful, and also in government. So I would say in government, it's probably a little bit easier because you don't have to have clients that you're trying to develop a book of business and those kinds of things. You will have cases that are assigned to you. For example, I worked for the Justice Department as a prosecutor, and so the cases come in, and then if you need to take time off, you can have a colleague cover it for you temporarily. We have a judge here now who is pregnant, and she's going to take 6 months off. And her cases that are coming up that have things that are coming up have been reassigned to her colleagues to take over. And so there are ways within government that are probably a little bit more accommodating than having large, high-paying private clients. And so there are, I think, if you explore, there are many ways to be successful in the legal profession.
So I think, Peggy, you make a really good point, which is encourage everyone in the audience that as you think about different legal careers that you could have, think about not just the content of the work, but think about the work environment, the barriers and lifestyle and so forth, because you got to find something that's a good match. And if discrimination is part of your decision, Peggy's point is correct. My guess is small law firms, it's a little easier than large law firms, right? So
not always,
not always,
but there are opportunities, is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
you have to find the right place.
Yeah, if you can be in a two-person law firm and be seriously discriminated against, that's right. So, it's very interesting. By the way, one of the things that the Asian American Career Ceilings program is doing is we're doing right now, we're finishing a survey of Asian Americans, asking them, have they been discriminated? What form, what's driven it, and so forth. And we're just getting the preliminary results, and we will have a broadcast to show the results. But Peggy, going back to what you're saying, a surprisingly high percentage of people said it was self-created problem, which is we really were surprised, and much higher than I would have expected, and so forth. So in that sense, one of the things, Cyndie, that you talked about is in relation to mentoring. And one of the things that we've observed across all of these panels is repeatedly people mention networking and mentorship as a key element of success, right? But of course, one of the problems is if there aren't that many Asian American or Asian American women, then it's hard to find mentors above you because there aren't that many. So you got to find mentors who are, not like you. But any comment about that, and maybe talk from each of your different, professions? Maybe, Peggy, is there such thing as a mentorship in the judicial system?
Absolutely, absolutely. And within NAPABA, because Cyndie was talking about it, we have a judicial council, and last year we started a judicial mentorship program. About 63 people signed up to be assigned a judicial mentor. And this year, almost 50 new people signed up as well. And it shows that there are lots of people in the Asian American community who are interested in becoming judicial law clerks and judges. And so, we are there to help each other and make sure that even if we're the first of whatever type we are, we're not the last. And so I think that I would call it community building more than networking, because when you build the community can support all the members. And it's not just up and down, it's across. So you have peers who are helping out. And frankly, people who are more junior to you can be very helpful in that regard as well. So I think if you build a community where people are supporting each other and are there for the ups and downs and to celebrate and to console, I think that really helps. And they can speak up for each other. I think one of the things about women, I remember being part of a women's bar association, and they said women are they don't want to talk about themselves. They don't want to brag. And so the suggestion, which I've always remembered, was develop a brag buddy. All right. So you don't have to brag about how great you are. Your friend will. And so you'll say, Alice is amazing, right? You should hire her for this and da, da, da. And then Alice will say, Peggy's amazing. And so in that way, we're supporting each other, but we're overcoming that natural hesitance to talk about ourselves in that way. So I think building a community where you can talk and support other people, I think is actually the best way to to move forward and to get ahead.
I would agree with you, Peggy, on the, sisterhood is really powerful. And some of my best clients, some of my best situations have been exactly that, where someone says, Alice, go talk to Alice. She's terrific. I know her well, and she would do a great job. And that does make a huge difference. But what I'm seeing is that it's also really important to advocate for oneself. When I chaired the Deloitte External Advisory Board on Diversity, which is now a dirty name, but it's still something I care deeply about, it was very clear that beginning accountants, there were lots of Asian Americans who came in, who joined accounting firms, but very few that made partner. And so the issue was, how do you hinge that handle? And it started out so early, where if uh, people were asked in a pool of accountants, and Peter would know a lot about these pools of accountants, and say, okay, who has experience or knows how to do such and such? The Asian Americans would second guess themselves and say, well, I don't know as much as the other person, blah, 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 so I'm not going to raise my hand. They don't raise their hand, and it becomes a pattern where the people who raise their hand get the chance. And then, oh, who's presented? Oh, the people who raised their hands. Okay, you guys can go on the client development thing. And then pretty soon they're developing clients, and the Asian Americans who said, oh, I'm really good at this, but I'm not going to speak up for myself. No one else speaks up for them. And gradually they start falling behind. So I think it is important to practice advocating for oneself. And that's something that I frankly didn't learn till I was about 50. Just kept thinking, oh, people will notice that I'm doing a great job, that I'm bringing in a lot of money and whatever. And so, they'll just automatically promote. This is within the partnership. And yet that doesn't happen unless you make it known, or sometimes you have to be the squeaky wheel. And I think as Asian Americans and as women, we tend not to want to be that squeaky wheel, and we pay a penalty for that over the years.
Yeah.
I can't.
One short story I will just say, which is one of our events. We interviewed the CEO of Heidrick and Struggles, who was the first Asian American, Indian American, and he told a story. He said, you should not think of the traditional ways of networking, connecting. He said, when I was at a consulting firm and Heidrick, uh, they wanted me to join Heidrick and Struggles and do executive search. And one of the things I requested was that I go to each of the offices and meet the people at all the offices. And he did. And he said it was those connections that he made with those people that years later, when they were choosing who to be the CEO of Heidrick and Struggles, he had all these people at all the offices who had met him and so forth. Now, that's not a traditional way to network, but it was pretty clever, right? But he also got to know the people. Cyndie, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what was just said, and Peter, and your point is well taken. I mean, at a large law firm, sometimes you do have to do that when you're on your partnership path, which is to get to know partners at different offices. I know I tried to do that myself when I was up for partnership. I think just speaking to like the path at my firm, being an excellent lawyer and doing the hours and turning over excellent work product, that's just table stakes. That is the minimum. And what you do at the very beginning of your career. But to become partner, it's your leadership skills, your network, and your community engagement too, that are also very, very important factors. And I think for me, like when I'm looking at associates, I have my own busy practice. I can't keep track of what everybody's doing. So if they do not tell me about it, I just really don't know. So if they are just behind their desk and saying, oh, Cyndie's going to notice this, I spoke at this, and just there's not that many hours in the day. So unless you raise your voice and say, hey, by the way, I spoke here, or I got published here or something, I just don't know. I mean, we have mechanisms, which is, the associates put together their personal development plan and things like that. But, sometimes you just have to drill it in my head, and you have to tell other partners so that we can speak on your behalf. So really, to the earlier points that were made, and I know for me, I just found that I was able to find the mentors and the sponsors through bar associations. It's just so, I mean, that's why I've become so involved in it. I found my clients there. I found people who gave me advice that I could speak to outside of my firm where I felt uncomfortable speaking to anyone within the firm. And, regardless of whether you're in a law firm or whether you're in a different environment, a corporate law department or pro bono or, in the judiciary, there's going to be politics. I mean, I know I can only speak from being in law firm, but I know having been a PABA president and doing a road tour and speaking to so many people, law students and young lawyers in different facets of the profession, regardless of where they're at, they do deal with unconscious bias or implicit bias and politics. And so it's really important for that individual to really know how the organization works and what the
Yeah.
organization values.
Yeah. And also, I think an important point is be honest with yourself and ask yourself, are you good at politics? Do you like politics? If you're not good at politics and you don't like politics, then one of the criteria is not join an organization where politics are key to success.
I'm going to
And
disagree with you, Peter,
you
because
are?
there's politics involved in everything.
Yeah, well,
Because
yeah,
it's not about avoiding politics, it's about figuring out how to do it smart. And I echo Cyndie's point about knowing the culture of the place, because
yeah,
if it's an organization where people don't go around overtly bragging, then you shouldn't do it either. You should
yeah,
figure
yeah,
out what it is that gets people's attention, and who are the right people to know. And so
yeah,
to the extent that that's politics, I think you do always have to understand how the relationships are built and
yeah,
whose attention you need to get.
yeah,
To become a judge, I'm not an elected official and I wasn't appointed by the president, but I had to be appointed by the board of judges of my district. So all the district judges in this court had to vote to appoint the magistrate judge. And how did I come to their attention? Number one, I had to do what Alice said, which is to raise my hand and say, I can do this, right?
yeah,
And you put in an application and then you say, okay, I'm as good as anybody else who's applying, so I want to be considered. And then the other thing is I had to be involved in all these bar activities so that there were people who were prominent people in the community who knew me and knew the judges. And so they could say good things about me to the judges.
yeah,
And so all of those things, maybe that's not what you're talking about when you say politics, but the human relationships and getting people to believe in you and to support you and to speak for you and to recognize your abilities is super important everywhere.
yeah.
And this doesn't come naturally
But
to a
Peggy,
lot of people.
I actually
So,
agree.
well,
I actually agree with your point about there's politics everywhere. It's just they can be different by the type of organization
Exactly.
and also the level of politics.
Yes.
And there are politics if there are more than two people in a company, right? So it's just the
Exactly.
level and the nature of the politics. Alice, you were saying?
yeah, I think that a lot of people feel that this is sort of a natural thing that you either can do and know, or you don't know how to do and you can't learn. I, in fact, have found that when I started out in law practice, I had to create my own business in a sense, because although I was at big Wall Street firms, they didn't know what to do with me as a woman and a minority. And I also looked about 10 or 12 years old, so that didn't help either as an Asian American. But what I learned over the years is you have to practice it, um, getting out there and networking and talking with people and speaking. And so I've, over the years, had my associates, particularly my minority and women associates, where I trained them. I said, okay, we're going to go to this conference and you need to come back to me with three, back in the day when people carried around name cards and not just clicked phones, but said, come back to me with three name cards of people that you think are potential clients. And I want you to find out what they do, what they're interested in, what their hobbies are. What you need to do more than just ask them a legal question as such, to show your legal prowess. And then you need to, a week later, send a note to them, or email as time went by, as opposed to longhand notes in the old days, and engage them. How do you develop clients? And it's an art, but it's also a science, and it's something you can learn. And so I tried really hard to train people to get a little out of their comfort zone, but anyone can learn. And I think it's a mistaken, oftentimes people say, well, I'm shy, I can't do this. Sure, it's like anything else that you can learn. And you will have different styles. And Cyndie's style, my style, Peggy's style are going to be very different. So you have to create and figure out your own style of bringing your best foot forward. But I think it's quite doable.
Now, this is a really good conversation because you're all talking about what are the tools that you can use or the things you need to recognize, so forth. Are there any other tools that any of you would like to comment on that helps this career ceiling problem, either just as an Asian American or in particular as an Asian American woman that you'd like to cite? Because there are many different tools, right? Mentoring is, one, connections another, being more aggressive. But any other ones that you can think of that you think the audience would like to hear about?
So I guess I'll go next. I like to observe other lawyers in action. And so being a litigator, I know a lot of times now court appearances are remote, but I used to literally just go to court with a lot of the partners, and I used to watch and, pick what things I liked and try to, cherry pick. I like this, I like that, in terms of also not only in court, but also in writing, what kind of style I like. So to Alice's point is, everyone's style is different, but from those who are more senior to me, that's really, especially when you're an associate, that's really a growing period of time to develop what kind of lawyer you will be, and to really kind of pick up good habits and learn from other people's bad habits. Because there are partners that have a lot of bad habits, and you say, I don't want to be like that. So what am I going to do to prevent myself from being like that? So that's one. And then the other thing is self-awareness. I've done a lot of work on myself in terms of, being a leader, how I talk to those that are working for me, and those, with staff, and this and that, and just really trying to get honest and critical feedback from everyone around me so that I can help become, the better me. And it takes some humility sometimes, because I'll have sometimes my office manager, and she'll put me in check. And she'll tell me, she say, maybe that's too aggressive. Maybe you need to be a little softer. But I think you really have to be open, and to let other people know that you're open for that feedback too. And that could be not only in what I just mentioned, but that can be in like personality tests, knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. Maybe you might take a personality test and realize you have very little empathy. And so what can you do about that? So I mean, I know that, like, when I manage people, and I've worked with dozens and dozens, I would say probably well over 100 associates just throughout the many, many years. And I've just seen certain people just have a lack of self-awareness and not realizing what they're doing or saying or how they're coming across. And then it's hard for me as a manager to say, how am I going to tell this person, what's the right time to tell this person that this is not coming out probably the way they intended. So having self-awareness and doing that work for yourself will really help you go a long way.
Cyndie, a follow-on question. How do you do that? I mean, the vast majority of people have a hard time being objective about themselves. That's just reality, right? So what advice you have people to make to that who are listening to this broadcast of how they could create kind of a really honest, self-awareness? What would be the best way for them, as opposed to your boss saying, I got to tell you something about yourself that you don't know. And then, of course, at that point, maybe too late.
Yeah, well, I've read a lot of books. I'm not gonna lie, I've gone to therapy to try to talk about, how I can become better. I think you have to also have people in a circle that you trust, and you trust their feedback. That could be your mom and dad, that could be your siblings, that could be people who are your, partners, to just say, hey, is that email come off, too harsh? Or, or is my feedback a little bit too critical? Or, I don't know. I mean, you really have to solicit that feedback too, because if you're in a certain position of power, people won't want to give you that feedback unless you solicit it, because they're just maybe afraid to do that. So you do have to have that circle of people you ask for, and then do your own work, whether that would be, talking to professionals, going to programs. I've gone to so many leadership programs. I mean, this I think is like, similar to that, in that you're doing the self work by going to programs like this, and this is what career ceilings program, and learning from other people. So I think all of that counts.
And if you solicit the feedback, you also have to give permission to give you something, give feedback that's critical. Because if you
Right.
ask, how am I doing? The first answer is going to be, oh, you're doing great, you're doing great. And so you have to make the person feel comfortable to say
Yes.
something negative. And so that's an art, to really solicit and get real feedback, and then take it to heart, and then see how you can implement it. The
Yeah,
other
good.
thing
Mhm.
along those lines is to see how people are reacting to you, to become a very good observer and listener as to how people are reacting to you and interacting with you. I was talking to somebody recently, who said, I'm not defensive. Because I said, when you're getting feedback, you shouldn't be defensive. And she said, I don't think I'm defensive. And then she's like, although the other day someone told me I was defensive. And I said, well, that's good feedback. So then you should figure out what you're doing that is creating the impression that you're being, so I think you are constantly getting feedback, but you're just not maybe attuned to it. So becoming more sensitive to when you are in fact getting messages from the world about how you're acting, and then you can
By the way,
incorporate it to see if that's a
wa-
good thing or bad thing.
I want to just point out that as part of this Asian American Careers series, we have these things and researchers, but we also have a masterclass series focused on skills. So we have one on how you promote yourself, how do you make it, and those are all recorded so that if you want to listen to some experts talk about how you develop mentors or whatever, you just go to the recordings that are on the Committee 100 website. I think any panel or any discussion that does not raise the question of AI is derelict. And it's a little bit hard to say what the connection is, but AI is changing so many different professions. But rather than focus on, okay, what's going to do, to jobs or whatever, do you think there's any element, what are there any elements of the impact of AI on the legal profession that will have an impact on career development, and how you as an Asian American woman or way through? I know it's a little bit of a subtle question, but I think it's a legitimate question.
I guess I'll start. So I think AI is here, and I think it's probably going to be one of the biggest impacts to our profession in this generation. Um, I've just seen things that I used to do as a young litigator now can be done within minutes. So going to some city and sitting in a warehouse and reviewing documents and boxes of documents. You know, I saw a program, I guess a demonstration of AI, and you type in a prompt and you ask to look for that document, and it can go through hundreds and hundreds of documents that we used to do like hours and hours, and can find that particular document very quickly. So the hours that we used to do, for that, I've seen where briefs, you could say, hey, write this brief that's in the style of Justice Scalia, and it can like do a very good job of doing that. It's certainly not perfect, and there's going to be perhaps maybe some errors in case citations, but it's a template that someone can start with. So things that the fundamental skills that we learned, or I learned as a litigator, just what will happen to that process. But taking a step back, and thinking about what we do as lawyers, is we solve problems, and that's not going to stop. That the world is still going to need lawyers to solve those problems, because that's just inherent in society. And, whether you're buying a company, getting sued, I mean, we still have the justice system, like all that still exists. And so the logistics of how we get there in terms of solving that problem, we might have more quicker processes to look through the documents and so forth. But I still think that lawyers are going to be needed. We just have to be a little resilient and embrace this change and figure out different skills in how we're going to get to that place in a different way.
Is that going to change the career path for people? Yeah, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, I think it's going to eliminate paralegals.
Let me just give you an example. Someone who's in the computer industry said the computer science industry is being turned upside down. So basically what it's doing is it's wiping out junior computer science jobs, but it still requires experienced computer science people to check the work. But then how do you get to experienced computer science if you never get in the entry? So it's turning that profession upside down. Is that similar in the legal profession? Is that going to change the career path?
As I said, I think it's going to eliminate the paralegal level pretty much, because you're going to have people who are going to look at the data that has been collected, every reference to whatever. You're going to need people who really have both a really good handle on AI and the technology and the pluses and minuses and the hallucinations and the possible areas of error. But you also have to develop those logical skills that you need as a lawyer anyway. So I think that people should not be afraid of AI. I think it's going to be a tremendous benefit, but the correct use of it and the discernibility. So, for example, lots of people now can look at an AI generated video or whatever and go, okay, because of this and this and this, it's fake. And they'll be correct about it. But those who have less experience are going to look at it and say, oh, that's real. That's really happening. So I think that to get really, as a young lawyer, you're going to need to really know the technology and its limits, and to be very able to manipulate, to work with it, but at the same time develop the kind of skills that every lawyer needs, which is listening, figuring out what's crap and what's important, creating a description that's going to, if you're trying to persuade, if you're trying to negotiate, whatever it is. So I think those abilities, they're going to be a little harder to learn because, frankly, the senior partners in firms aren't really going to know how to do it anyway. So you're going to have to rely on this next sort of the lower level of people who have those discernible skills, and you're going to have to develop a lot of those skills yourself, and to learn to listen or to figure out what seems a little off, and then explore further before coming to hasty conclusions. Yeah. And I think those kinds of skills are not necessarily purely legal skills as such, but they're skills that can be learned, and they're going to be very, very valuable. AI is definitely here to stay. I think it's going to, you're going to lose a whole tier of the sort of data, day-to-day paralegal kind of work, but it's going to require a lot of care, carefulness. And I think that's a skill that lawyers need anyway. And I think that legal fees, it's going to be no longer the hourly basis, because if AI can do it in 30 seconds and do a Scalia-like brief, it's going to be fast. But at the same time, you're really going to have to dig deep and make sure that that is exactly what you want to say.
Yeah, I think the critical thinking skills are going to be absolutely key. You will need people who can look at what is out there, every content, and look at it and say, that's weird, and ask those questions like, what is that about? And have the curiosity to keep digging. I think AI is a misnomer. I think it should be IA because it's really information aggregating. It's just information and it's not giving you any critical thought. The critical thought still is coming from humans. Now, maybe the next generation will be critical, but even then they'll still need to be, maybe you'll need to do less policing of what's being generated, but you'll still have to look at it critically. And so it'll be as if everybody has a personal intern that you can say, go find all this stuff for me and do a first draft. But in the same way that I would never publish a judicial opinion that was written by an intern, I wouldn't rely on what's been generated by AI. I'd have to go through it, make sure it's right, make sure it sounds right, make sure it makes sense, make sure the outcome is right, and all those other skills. So I think people are going to have to develop those skills. But the generating of all the vast information is pretty amazing. I mean, when Google was invented and that you could just type in random words and something would come up, I thought that was great, and I still use it. And frankly, when I type things in now in Google and the AI pops up, I do look at it because it's useful, but then you have to keep looking because, the first information is not always right. So I think people just have to learn, and I think Alice is right. It's not just the legal profession. In every place, we need to be more critical. And I think that people coming out of law school should be a little bit concerned about the jobs in the middle not being there. But I think they're going to be a very useful bridge to the older generation who really don't understand AI. So really what the younger generation is going to be contributing in the short term is an understanding of the technology and making that bridge. And I think if you can do that, you'll already be value added wherever you go.
I have a derivative question to ask all three of you that actually applies to all three of you. So, in the legal profession, you can join a law firm and be a lawyer, work with clients and so forth, so on, and have a career there, which is the most common. All three of you, though, from my understanding of your current job or what you did before, all took on different roles, management roles, right? I mean, Cyndie, you're running the LA office. Peggy, I know for a period of time you were a judge, but you were also running an administrative part of the judicial system. And Alice, I know you ran, offices or practices, right? Practice areas for the. What's different about that dimension, right? Because if we're talking about a different kind of leadership skill and a different kind of leadership role, should Asian American women think about that in terms of their success? Because it's not necessarily true that the same things are required to become head of in the LA office versus just being a really successful partner of a law firm, right? Any comments on that? Because I mean, all three of you were successful in getting into leadership roles that were not just the primary function. And so I think I just realized that, and I thought that would be a fair question for all three of you. Well, Peggy, anything? I know, I guess that's not a required thing to be a judge, right? I mean, you decided to go in that direction, right?
Well, I mean, I think your question, Peter, is about leadership generally.
Yeah.
And the skills that come with that rather than the purely analytical ones of the specific case that you're working on. And I think a lot of those things we've touched on today, because it's about relationships, it's about being sensitive to how people are acting, understanding human behavior, motivations, giving feedback, getting feedback. So all the relationship things are very important there. And I think it's the key to any success. I don't think as you progress in a legal career, you can get to any high level without having some of those leadership skills, because it's about understanding people and appreciating your value to them and their value to you, but not in just that transactional way, but actually let me put it this way, enjoying being with people, because you will have clients that you like being with, and that's how they end up being your clients. Or you have colleagues that you like being with, and that's why you end up staying in that job for so long. So whatever it is, if you have a good human relationship or good interactions with people, I think that remains the key.
I totally agree with Peggy. It's lots of relationship building, and the company or the firm or the entity that you're working for, and trusting you with that. It's good skills to have. But what I will say also specific to the legal profession and having a leadership role in that is that it's a challenge to manage lawyers because they are A-type personalities. And I don't know if that exists. I'm sure it exists in certain other professions, but with lawyers, I think there's a special skill involved because I think lawyers know how to argue really know how to argue really well, highly intelligent, and certainly, especially like in a law firm, people want to be productive. They want to they have got a lot of demands on them. They need to bill hours, for example, and you want to help them do the best that they can do. I mean, and so I've really learned, not only just general leadership, but leading lawyers. That's been a very, very artful skill to develop.
Ms.
Herding
Cyndie,
cats,
first
right?
question, do Asian American women proportionally do better or worse in leadership roles versus just being, it's, say a law firm, say has 5% Asian American women as partners, but they may have more or less percentage in leadership roles. I mean, do you see any pattern there that you can think of? In other words, do Asian American women do better or worse relative to being generally a lawyer in leadership positions?
I don't think you can make a generalization on that because every law firm, frankly, is different. I mean, I've been at every kind of law firm, and they really, the dynamic is vastly different. The kind of leadership role is also very different. But I will say, unless you're comfortable with being a little lonely, being a leader is very tough. It is because you second guess yourself a lot and you are in charge and you're making the decisions, but it affects a lot of other people, and how you do it and how you come across becomes really important. So I would say, as you're charging up the ladder and wanting to become a leader of an organization, I think it is important that we have more representation as women and as Asian Americans. So I want women to aspire to that and not fall off the track, as it were. But I also think it's really important, and we haven't really mentioned this, but I think, before we close, we have to, I need to mention this. It's really important to keep friendships, to keep family close, to have people that you are comfortable with letting down your hair, with feeling that you're not completely alone, because it can be very lonely, and it can be very difficult. So I've always urged women and minorities, as you're on the leadership track, to not forget your friends, your family, to be there for them, because when you are in a difficult position, uh, it's really important to have people you can lean on or rely on who are not necessarily in your profession, in your organization. And so I just mention that as kind of a little tip or hint. Don't just always put your work first and ignore family and friends, because they are really the people that will keep you on course in the course of a long career, whatever that may be, whether it's judicial or law firms or corporations or not for profits. I
Yeah.
also believe that you should do what you can to give back, whether it's bar association, not for profits, whatever, because life is not just the destination. And to have that sense of fulfillment, It's really important to feel that you've somehow done more than just advanced your own career.
Well, that advice, by the way, is not specific to just women or Asian Americans. That's general personal advice, which I think is good for all of us. I want to end with one request for each panelist, but also for full disclosure. One, three of us are Committee 100 members, Cyndie, Alice, and myself. And for total full disclosure, Alice is my sister, and I can assure you that she has never been bashful. So,
I
so what
was
I'd like,
shy when I was younger.
yeah, no, she may have had other things she had to overcome, but that was not one of them. Now, I'd like to end by asking each panelist, just think about a sentence or two that you would like to share, or advise, or whatever it may be, with the attendees as we end. By the way, there were questions, but they were all kind of personal advice, so I felt it was not really, some of them were not really appropriate to be answered in a general setting, but I will pass them on to the panelists and they can respond. But so with each of you, a sentence or two or 5 sentences on what parting words to our attendees on how to deal with this career ceiling issue. Peggy, you want to start?
Sure. Do the hard work to get yourself prepared and be the best you can, and then go forth with confidence. And don't be afraid of failure. Failure is often where some of the best things happen. I saw one of the questions was about talking about a personal failure. And I got passed over for a promotion, and then ended up going overseas to work at the UN War Crimes Tribunal, which was probably the best thing for me at that point. And I might not have taken that risk if I had gotten the promotion. So take risks, don't be afraid of failure, and consider every failure an opportunity for future success and something better.
Yeah, by the way, I just noticed that third question, Peggy, and that is true. And one thing's for sure is if you study all the famous people, Abraham Lincoln, whatever, you can't find one that didn't have some major personal, failure or obstacle in their place. So if you think you're going to be successful because you just never had to pivot or just a failure, the reality is all these famous people had something, whether it's FDR, Abraham Lincoln, or whatever. It was how they fought their way through and got around it. Cyndie?
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, my personal adversities really have defined me and really have shaped my perspective. So I agree with that. And I would also say that think of your career as a marathon, not a sprint. And you might try different things and they don't work out, and you pivot and you change to a different area of law or change to a different type of place that you work at. But that's okay. It's all part of this journey. So exhale and when you're young in your careers, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to get there, I got to get there, I got to get there. But really, when you're 20 years in or 30 years in and so forth, you're like, those few years, that I was working at this other place, that's okay. It's like a blip in my career. I learned a lot when I was there and I pivoted. So, have that perspective that it is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah. Alice?
I would say I agree with all of that. And I would say work really hard to be lucky. And what I mean by that is, you do the work, you don't cut corners, but you also keep open the windows and the doors, because sometimes those failures, sometimes you get lucky because you're in the right place at the right time, but you've worked to be at those various places at the right time. And so I would say just keep those doors and windows open to opportunity. So don't be afraid of spreading a net, talking to people, whether it's bar associations, whatever, because what you're doing at the moment may turn into something completely different. AI can take over your job, and then you can find another opportunity. So that I would leave that thought along with what Peggy and Cyndie have also said.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank the panelists. And by the way, one comment, Cyndie, about your comment about don't be afraid to change jobs. The reality is 20, 30 years ago, the most common thing, you join a company and you get a gold watch at the end, you retire, and then you learn how to play golf or something, right? But now the typical career, if you look at the data, typically now successful people have two or three different kinds of careers. Why that's true, there are a lot of theories as to why that's true, but it's something you think of, into account that that it's more the norm now that people have more than one career. And it doesn't mean that's what you should engineer. It just is, it's just that's happening in this society. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the three of you. Wonderful insights, and I hope the audience, you feel that you've learned something, and and can benefit from their advice. And I look forward to seeing many of you at our next events. Thank you very much.